Skaptason. I'm a volunteer here at the park. I think almost everybody I'm looking at here has heard this spiel before, but I love saying it. I love welcoming people to Shiloh and saying I had the good privilege when I was in school to work as a seasonal ranger here at Shiloh, and they invite me back every year on the anniversary to talk about this fascinating battle. This is the 153rd anniversary of the Battle of Shiloh, and the Federal Army still wins. Grant still wins. It's going to come out the same. Sorry for my Southern friends, but it's going to end the same way this year.
Spoiler alert.
Yes, spoiler alert.
This is gorgeous.
The program we're going to do right now, this is early on Sunday morning. This is the first time that we've ever done a program that we did our dawn program and then we just kept going. That's the concept for this program. And one of the reasons was, it occurred to me when I was thinking about programs to propose for this year, was we always seem to finish that dawn program. And we always seem to finish the Fraley Field program, then we go and we get a cup of coffee, and then we go to Sherman or Prentice's camp and we talk about the main Confederate attack on the camp. And it occurred to me that there's 2 hours of time in there that we just kind of skip over. The first artillery shot fired by the Confederates into a Union camp occurred at 7:10 or 7:11, depending on whose watch we were checking. And we're going to visit the spot from whence that shot was fired, and we're going to visit its target in this program. But a lot of time went by between that 4:55 first shot in Fraley Field, between Major Hardcastle's Mississippi pickets and Major Powell's Missouri and Michigan patrol. A lot of time went by and a lot of fighting occurred. But it wasn't the kind of fighting that we interpret usually around the Shiloh battlefield. It was much more low intensity fighting, skirmishing. And so you have a very large Confederate army moving across this landscape and having to struggle across this landscape, and they're sending out clouds of skirmishers ahead of them in order to brush aside whatever Union outposts are in front of them, so that the main Confederate army can arrive at the main Union camps, attack them, turn the left flank of the enemy, drive them into the swamps and destroy them. That's General Johnston's plan of battle. He's very clear about it in his battle order. We're going to turn the left flank of the enemy and drive them into the swamps. Well, there's this initial phase where the Confederate Army has to close that mile between where they camped and between the Union camps. And during that phase, their skirmishers have to get out in front of the Army and clear the way. And likewise, as the Union defenders begin to slowly understand what's coming their way, they send out stronger pickets, reinforcements to the pickets, reinforcements to Major Powell's reconnaissance. And these small forces put up some very stiff resistance, and they do some hard fighting in order to delay the Confederate advance as much as they possibly can. Confederate advance will be delayed in any case, because moving through this landscape, through this more open forest than this, but still moving through this landscape and across these creeks and hills and through these forests, it's going to take time anyway. But the Union outposts, the Union skirmishers, the Union pickets are going to make every opportunity, they're going to take every opportunity to make the Confederates fight for every yard of ground. Now, the way we're going to structure our talk is going to be a little more geographical than chronological. in that we're about to cross over this creek here and visit this tablet up over here, and visit a position that Colonel Moore fell back to from C Field, and then we're going to walk up to C Field and talk about what happened before that. And then once we get back up to the Fraley Field area, we'll be in a position to get back onto a chronology that's more similar to what happened today. But for the first half of the program, we're going to be moving back in time, starting at the fallback position of Dave Moore's fallback position, then moving up to his first position. Let's start by moving down through this creek here and up the other side and just up to this tablet on top of the hill. We have some, we have some thorns here.
Yep, bars there, but we do have, got sawbars on the bank, we do got stepping stones down.
The second stepping stone is loose. It'll bury you, but yeah. Stand made by Colonel David Moore's 21st Missouri, and as our tablet tells us, the 21st Missouri, originally half of the regiment was dispatched to support Powell's patrol. Once they heard the firing in Fraley Field, Colonel Peabody sent Colonel Dave Powell of the 21st Missouri out with half of his regiment. That's 5 companies. And Powell came out this road and he met the pickets of the 16th Wisconsin Regiment under Captain Sachs, and then they moved on up the road. They got engaged in the battle at C Field. We're going to talk in detail about that battle when we get there. But that battle did not work out for Dave Powell. He was wounded and sent to the rear. Some of his men were shot. The Confederates, of course, had overwhelming superiority in numbers, and they drove the Federals back across this landscape, back across this rolling landscape. And here is where Lieutenant Colonel Humphrey Woodyard, again I said Powell was wounded in the first encounter, and so Lieutenant Colonel Humphrey Woodyard rallied the force at this point and made another stand. And so he had probably about 800 men between the half of the 21st Missouri, then the 3 companies of the 25th, 2 companies of the 12th Michigan, 4 companies of the 6th Wisconsin, and then Moore had sent for the rest of his regiment. When they first became engaged in C Field, Moore sent for the rest of the regiment, so the rest of the 21st Missouri came to this position. So they had the entire 21st Missouri Regiment and then all of these detachments of pickets. They didn't cover much ground. I mean, they would have just covered right over the road there and then up into this area. They would have deployed skirmishers in front in order to do everything they could to delay the Confederates as they advanced. Then the Confederates would have pushed the skirmishers in, then the Confederates would have advanced, and there would have been a general engagement, line of battle engagement along here, by the time the Confederates crested this high ground here and then came through this water here. Eventually the Confederates are going to have a much wider front. And so once that happens and the Confederates can fire into the flanks, then Woodyard needed to, at that point Woodyard needed to fall back. And he ordered this position abandoned. But as you can see, by milking every second he could possibly stay here, by staying on this position, Woodyard staying on this position until the last possible minute while the Confederates were by both of his flanks, he delayed the Confederates for an hour. This is 6:30 to 7:30. As we said earlier before, the 4:55 was the first fire in Fraley Field. They fought there for an hour until almost 6, and then about half an hour in the C field. And then Woodyard held them up for another hour here. The Confederates in front would have been Wood's brigade and then Shaver's Arkansas brigade up over here. What we're going to do next is we're going to head straight this direction, keeping the road on our right, and head through the woods back up to C field. So follow me.
Now there's been no artillery involved so far.
No artillery involved up to this point of the battle.
Okay, yeah.
It's going to get softer as we move across it. He needed to know that. He wouldn't plant one of these things if he didn't know exactly with 100% certitude what he was talking about. And generally when a tablet like this went down, it was because Major Reed was out here with some veterans, and they would go, here, right here, this is where it was. And he'd go, what, not over there? No, not over there. It was here. And that was usually the certainty that Reed required of himself to put a tablet down. But the point you're making is that, yeah, there's no Confederate marker to mark the combat with Woodyard. It shows something it's a strange sort of thing about this battlefield interpretation, and for going to battlefields for us and learning there, and also for those of us who interpret it, there's a real bias in battlefield interpretation in favor of stuff we know. There's a bias in favor of stuff we know. No one's going to pay all the money for an iron marker that says, I think maybe there might have been this or that. And that's for books. That's for historians to sit and write books and have these arguments about that kind of stuff. And that also tells us that when Major Reed commits himself to interpreting this battlefield, it means he's sure. It means he's absolutely sure, down to the mark on the ground, that this is what happened and this is where it happened. Now, what do we have here? This is chronologically before our last stop. And so this was the first position that Major Moore and the 21st Missouri took in the line of battle, resisting the Confederates. As we said in the first program, some of you are not here for the first program, but in the first program we told how Major Powell of the 25th Missouri, in charge of the reconnoitering party, retreated down this road in the face of the advancing Confederates, General Hardee's corps. And that there he met Colonel Dave Powell with half of the 21st Missouri, 5 companies of the 21st Missouri Regiment. Colonel Moore ordered Major Powell to join him, and that they would come back and they would whip up these Confederates and drive them away, because together, they had 500 or 800 men. Of course, the Confederates, Sidney Johnson, had 44,500 Confederates coming this way. But Dave Moore liked fighting, and he was looking forward to getting into this fight. Dave Moore is from northeast Missouri, the area around Athens, the extreme northwest corner. There, early in the war, he had commanded a Unionist paramilitary force in a battle called the Battle of Athens. And you can go. There's a Missouri State Park. You can go visit the Battle of Athens. And in that battle against a local Confederate paramilitary organization commanded by a guy named Martin Greene, Colonel Moore won that battle. And there was a fun story from that battle in that Colonel Moore's son went with Colonel Greene. He was Confederate. And Dave Moore was strongly Union. And these are neighbors. These are all just people from the same neighborhood in northeast Missouri. And they form their groups and they get into this fight at Athens. And Greene attacked Moore, and they were driving Moore's group back. They drove him back to the Keokuk River, and then finally the Iowa troops on the other side of the river decided to go ahead and cross and join Colonel Moore, and that won the battle for Colonel Moore. But after the battle was over, Martin Greene was talking to young Mr. Moore on his staff. He said, we almost had him beat. And young Mr. Moore the Confederate said, what you don't understand is that my pa don't scare worth a damn. And so eventually Dave Moore converted his paramilitary fighters into, they actually joined the Army and they became the 21st Missouri Infantry Regiment, and they came here to fight. Moore led his men into this field, immediately saw that he had Confederates all along the tree line that he had to fight, and then they opened fire. The Confederates opened fire, and at first fire, Colonel Moore was struck in the leg. It was a very bad wound to the leg, broke the bone. He had to be taken down off his horse and carried to the rear, and that's when Lieutenant Colonel Humphrey Woodyard took over command of the force. Eventually, Moore had his leg amputated and promptly returned to duty. He didn't scare worth a damn. And so this is the first position that Moore made his stand. And of course, the Confederates were all along in here, and they would have thrown out a skirmish line, and the skirmishers would have pushed in more skirmishers, and then once the Confederates advanced out of that wood line, this party had to fall back. But they held on as long as they could. This is a 30-minute fight. An hour in Fraley Field, 30 minutes here. An hour with Woodyard holding in front of that creek down there, the south branch of Shiloh Creek. So even though they are vastly outnumbered, the Federals fall back and they fight every time they have a chance. Now, at any one of these times, at any one of these stands, the Confederates could have just devoured this force. They could have come around the flanks, they could have sent people around, but all of that would have interrupted the Confederate advance. I mean, breaking up the organization, breaking up those lines of battle that are supposed to go fight the Union divisions over here and defeat them, breaking that up in order to gobble up a small force is going to break up that organization, and that will stop them just as effectively as Union resistance. So even though the Confederate Army is much larger, every time they encounter resistance like this, the men actually in front need to take responsibility for pushing them back. Of course, they can flank them by fire. Oblique fire can come, and that could be very effective, and it was very effective in driving these back. But they cannot break their formation, come around the sides, and surround these little detachments. That's not General Johnston's plan. Okay, what we're going to do next is transfer over to the Confederate point of view and look at some of the Confederate perspective of this fight over in that woodline. Follow me. Okay, now we've sort of switched perspective. We've switched perspective to the Confederate perspective of attacking, and we're going to stick with this for a little while. And I suppose this is a good time to bring us back to the title of our program and explain why it is what it is. The title of this program is called Ponderous Avalanche. I might have written a subtitle, but I don't remember it. But a Ponderous Avalanche. And the reason I called it that is that General P.G.T. Beauregard, who succeeded to command of the Confederate Army after General Albert Sidney Johnston was killed, later in his writing about this, General Beauregard was quite the romantic writer. He had quite the purple pen. And when he later wrote about this attack, he said that the Confederates had fallen upon the Union camps at Shiloh like an Alpine Avalanche. Like an Alpine Avalanche. And that thinking has infused many generations of historical study of Shiloh. We get this, you imagine an Alpine Avalanche with this cascading, snow pounding down the mountain and crushing everything beneath it. And that, of course, that benefited, in the memory of the battle, that benefited General Beauregard. It made him seem like they were accomplishing something pretty great. And for generations, it was told over and over again that the Confederates came screaming into the Union camps and the Yankees got bayoneted in their tents, and this sort of creates this imagery of the Yankee soldiers running around in their Union suits with the backs flapping and that kind of thing, which, I've read lots and lots of books and articles and chapters and books about Shiloh that make it seem like that was what the attack was like. It absolutely was not. It took a long time, as we've been seeing. It took a long time for the Confederates to get across this landscape. If Beauregard's attack was an Alpine Avalanche, I guess all we can say for Beauregard there is that, technically speaking, a glacier is an avalanche. It's just the kind of avalanche that goes really, really slow. It is ice coming down a mountain, but it's not the kind of avalanche that General Beauregard would have wanted us to visualize. And indeed, it was a ponderous avalanche. They moved very slow, very powerful, and sweeping everything before them, but doing it slowly. So here we've come to the position where there's another marker down here. We're not going to go out of our way to go see it, but there's a marker down this trail here. Hard to see the trail at this point of the year, but they're going to clear it out. For the skirmishers of Colonel Robert Shaver's Arkansas Brigade. And so they were fighting down there in that area. And some of you have read the reminiscences of Henry Morton Stanley, the Welsh adventurer who left a memoir of Shiloh, and he talked about he and his friend picked violets and put them in their caps and said, maybe the Yankees won't shoot at us because violets are a sign of peace. That's the site where they would have been when that episode occurred. Where we're standing right now is the same troops that opened the battle against Major Powell earlier in the morning. Wood's brigade, Sterling A.M. Wood from Florence, Alabama, is General Wood, commanding a brigade of Tennessee and Arkansas and Mississippi troops. He had earlier used the 8th and 9th Arkansas regiments. Wood had used the 8th and 9th Arkansas regiments. They're both under strength, so he used them together as skirmishers on the 5th, as his outposts on April 5th. That night, he pulled them back in, and that's when he put Major Aaron Hardcastle in the 3rd Mississippi Battalion out there in Fraley Field. I don't know exactly why he did the switch. I'm gathering it because Major Hardcastle was a graduate of West Point and a protege of Albert Sidney Johnston. So in Major Hardcastle, he had an officer he knew he could trust on outpost duty. But once they started going forward, Hardcastle and his battalion had taken casualties and they'd shot up their units of fire. And so they had to fall back and get resupplied before they could rejoin the brigade. And that's when General Wood put the 8th and the 9th Arkansas back in front as skirmishers. So it would have been their business to move out into this field. Colonel Patterson's 8th, and I forget who's, maybe Major Kelly in charge of the 9th. I'm guessing on that. Colonel Patterson of the 8th, moving in skirmish formation out into the field to fight Dave Moore's 21st Missouri. And it would certainly have been a skirmisher from this force that shot a musket ball through Moore's leg. And eventually, they're the guys that pressed them on down the hill and engaged them further on. We're going to take our next trip back to Fraley Field. It'll be a return to Fraley Field for some of those who are there at 5 in the morning. Question right here.
At some point, Shaver's brigade, I guess its left breaks and the right of Wood's breaks. Is that here or?
No, that's at the first attack on the main camp.
Okay.
So the first, there's a wayside exhibit up here for Henry Morton Stanley, and they quote him. That's the area where, Wood and Shaver got mixed up because they're moving obliquely to the Union line of battle, and then Shaver adjusts, so he's going in, and then Wood continues obliquely. Wood marches in between the contenders party and Major Hardcastle's pickets. You can now see the tablet on the second rise from this one out in the field there. The only thing we're going to say at this point about this is a point I made with the earlier group on the reconnaissance party. The world gets very small for these people when it's dark. It's dark and these are woods. The world gets very small. And one of the things that we pointed out as we came down here, the first shots of the cavalry vedettes were up here on the road. They took some pot shots at Powell as they came by. At the exact same place, Powell and his party passed the most advanced outpost of General Sherman's division. It was Company G of the 77th Ohio under Captain McCormick. And so they were already posted there. And they were within feet of this engagement of when it first started. Well, the rest of General Sherman's picket line, with Captain McCormick being the most advanced, were in position along the edge of Fraley Field. And they were there all night. They were already here when Powell arrived and marched into the field at 4 in the morning, at 5 in the morning on the 6th. And so these pickets of General Sherman's division had already been here for a day, looking across that field and doing their best to send the word back that something was the matter here. So what we're going to do from here is head straight down the wood line into the north part of Fraley Field and visit the area where Sherman's picket posts were. So follow me. This is the northern part of Fraley Field, and we don't often come out here under normal circumstances, so the park lets it grow up. So it's great to come out here sometimes on the anniversary when we still have the grasses low. But like I said, this eastern end of Fraley Field was the outpost for Sherman's division. So all in these woods, and these wood lines are not exactly the same. These woods are certainly not there at the time. And this wood line was, I think, a little bit further to the east. But these were outposts for General Sherman's 5th Division, generally outposts manned by pickets from the 3rd Brigade, Colonel Hildebrand's brigade. As I said before, several companies of the 77th Ohio Regiment from Marietta, Washington County, Ohio. That regiment, under command of Lieutenant Colonel Wills de Haas, and several of the companies were in position out here all through the 5th of April. So all through the day before the battle, the 77th had several companies out here. I'm going to go ahead and button up. Now we have Captain Mason had been out here for 24 hours, and his pickets, his sergeants, and his corporals were telling him there's something in those woods over there. There's Confederates in those woods over there. We've had game, small game, rabbits and so on, running out of those woods and running toward us all day. These guys are pretty good small game hunters. They know that small game doesn't normally run towards a hunter. So something was flushing them out of those woods. they assumed it was the Confederates. And, oh, thank you, Marvin. And so, finally, Captain Mason sent a sergeant, sent one of his sergeants back to report to General Sherman. Well, General Sherman, there's something going on out here. And then late on the afternoon of the 5th, Captain Stevens, leading Company A of the 77th, came out to relieve Captain Mason and Company B. Captain Stevens came out and he pulled Captain Mason aside. He said, I have an order in my pocket for the arrest of that sergeant that you sent back. He said, I'm supposed to arrest him for bringing in a false report. And Captain Mason said, don't worry about that, I'll take it. You give me that order, I'll do what needs to be done with that order. Sergeant never was arrested, and it turned out to be right that there were Confederates out there. Early on the morning, at this point, on the other side of that field, the advance of General Patrick Cleburne's brigade would have come across there. These men would have been at their posts all during the hour of the fight with Major Powell in the southern part of Fraley Field and out on the Forest Road. And then finally, when the entire Confederate Army began to move out, General Cleburne's brigade came straight across that field with the 15th Arkansas Regiment scattered in front of them as skirmishers and began to engage these picket posts. And again, just like it happened with Major Colonel Woodyard and Colonel Moore in the Seafield, these men held out, the Ohioans held out as long as they could. They held out and fought those Arkansans as long as they could, and then they would start to fall back. Okay, we're going to plan is to move straight through there. I don't think we've been washed out yet, but there could be some mud in there. This is what you came to Shiloh for, right? Let's go. All along this trail that we were going along with Cleburne and his skirmishers moving down out of here. The other thing I wanted to point out, though, before we go back, we have an excellent illustration of something you see a lot at Shiloh, and that is how quickly and how deeply the water scours out this plateau. When we started our walk in Fraley Field, there was no creek in front of us. In fact, the ground rose in front of us. Now, we've marched parallel to that creek from the time we left. So from the last time we stopped and talked, so now we have added to the landscape a fully developed branch with a good 6-foot cut there. That's a significant impediment to an advancing army. And that's just within 500 yards, less than 500 yards from having nothing in front of us to having a creek in front of us. And you'll see that again and again on the Shiloh Plateau. Within a quarter mile of where Briar Creek rises out of the springs around the Hornet's Nest area, it becomes Tillman Branch. Within a mile, it becomes Tillman Branch, which is a deep ravine, a deep 50 or 60 foot ravine there was a significant barrier in the battlefield. That's just and this geography, this factor of the geography affects the battle a lot. Streams just rise up and become serious impediments very quickly. This stream is not yet a serious impediment. We'll stop it before.
Let's find out also, Bjorn, part of the map here, Fraley Field still goes up another village that way.
So we're in between here, right? We're clear according to the map right here?
Yeah.
So
about we're
in a position here, yeah, we're still in Fraley Field, and so we're going to follow the advance of the skirmishers of General Cleburne's division up toward the position where they're going to need to get in order to mount a serious attack upon the Sherman's Union division. And Beauregard Road will take us right up there. So let's head this direction. Corinth Road that came from the west.
It goes into 22
Yeah.
over there, about a quarter mile north of where the old park sign used to
Right.
sit.
But the historic road went pretty much parallel to Corinth Road, and it was for the locals to get their stuff to the main road. This is an old route. Yeah, this is a Civil War road. Yeah, and General Beauregard moved down this road and had his headquarters at it for a short time. A place called Beauregard Road. CV was asking us about this road. As you can see, there's a road that heads off over here, and asking where that went. And this is actually an interesting piece of Shiloh National Military Park history. It doesn't have anything to do with the battle. But of course, the park from 1895 until the era of the Civil Rights Movement was operated in a Jim Crow state. And so segregation was the law. So during that period, the park had to provide white facilities and colored facilities. And so this road that CV was pointing out, and you can see how the road goes up there, and you can see these posts that were put in there to block it. This is the access road to what was once the colored picnic area of Shiloh National Military Park. And it was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the CCC company that was camped here in the 1920s and 30s was an African-American company, African-American veterans of World War I. And they had a camp on the other side of what's now Highway 22, and they came out and they built all the infrastructure, the original infrastructure you see of the park. So a lot of the culverts, a lot of the bridges, a lot of the channeling on the you see in the creeks and stuff like that wasn't historical. They're the ones that came in and did that in the 30s, in the 20s and the 30s. So during that period, during the Jim Crow period, this was the segregated colored picnic area. Then the white picnic area was at what's known as Ray Springs, and we're actually going to go there. We're headed there right now. But two separate picnic areas. Let's head on down toward the artillery position. But again, all of that ground we just covered was ground that was fought over. And you know, we don't have tablets out there because with this low intensity fighting, the skirmish fighting, you don't have the landmarks. You don't have the landmarks to interpret. This is where a line of battle was. This is where we fight. This is where we fought. This is where after the battle there was a line of dead men piled up here. Things like that people remembered, veterans remembered. They could tell Reed, and he could put a tablet there. With this skirmish fighting, it's an entirely different perspective. They said, well, we started over there and then Claiborne attacked and we fell back fighting and running from tree to tree and then making it stand there and there. And there were 3 guys over there and 2 over there and, you know, that kind of stuff. They fell back skirmishing across this. And at the same time, the Confederates had to attack, had to advance through all of that landscape that we just crossed. Now, as we saw by checking the map, a lot of that landscape was open cotton field, J.C. Fraley's field. But certainly it becomes woods to the north of Beauregard Road. There's still some field, right? To the north of Beauregard, but then once it falls off into Shiloh Branch, then you have all sorts of woods and briars and all kinds of things like that. Finally, on this high spot, they fought their way to 15th Arkansas, fought their way across this landscape, got to this high spot, and finally they had a place where they could deploy artillery. This is the first Confederate artillery line. Over here you see a tablet for Shoup's battery, or Shoup's 3 batteries. He had a battalion of Hardee's Corps. Up here on top, a little bit of a rise. That's the Washington Artillery of New Orleans, and then Bankhead's artillery beyond that. And the tablet in front of the Washington Artillery says that the Washington Artillery fired their first shot into the Yankees camp. I believe it was General Claiborne, or General Hardee, I think, that said, let's wake them up. Shoop, let's wake them up. So they fired at 7:10, according to the tablet up there, fired upon a Union camp across one of the branches of Shiloh Branch, South Branch of Shiloh Branch up here, 53rd Ohio Camp. There was a section of artillery in there. one of the officers in the Union camp also thought this was worth noting, so he got out his pocket watch and checked the exact time that the first cannonball came over his head, and he said it was 7:11. So the Washington artillery and the Yankees were pretty close to agreement on one thing, the time. They couldn't agree on a lot of other things. But by 7:10, with a battle that started before 5, at 7:10, the first artillery round was fired into General Sherman's camp. Only after that do the Confederates form a line of battle, redeploy more from east to north, and launch an attack. General Claiborne launches an attack from this position down the hill and up toward Shiloh Church. And that's going to be the last thing we look at in our program today. We're actually going to get to the first place where they make an attack. So let's go. Just a waste of time. I was once visiting Fort Morgan in Mobile Bay. And when you're in Fort Morgan, there's, of course, it was bombarded, the Battle of Mobile Bay, and then after the Battle of Mobile Bay, the Union Navy bombarded the place. And so I went into Fort Morgan, and there was a ranger there that was leading me and my friend around, and we were going to this casemate. And like a lot of these masonry forts where it's been damaged, you can see where it's been repaired. And so you saw this newer brick and the older brick and the damage. He says, no, this was a hole that was blown right in the wall by a 32-pound shot. It came right through this wall and killed 3 or 4 guys and bounded right on into the fort during the bombardment. And we happened to be there in August. And I said, well, that wasn't on the day of the battle. And he goes, no, that was a few days after the battle. He goes, was it August 10th? Turned out, it was August 10th. He goes, what time did that cannonball come through the wall? We were looking at our watch. The guy said, I think it was about, they timed it. It was like 10, 12 in the morning. We all looked at our watch. We just sort of stepped away from the hole. We were right there at the exact moment the cannonball came through. Where we are here. Oh, I had such fun playing for you yesterday. When we had just a little bit of firmness afoot. We were going to go through this area over here. We're going to cross the bridge, go by Shiloh Spring, and come around that way from the Union point of view. I've decided to go ahead and to the road. This was an area. It's an area where 3 branches come together. There's the southern branch of Shiloh Branch that comes down, and then the main branch of Shiloh Branch comes down here, and they move together, and then Shiloh Spring rises out of the hill where Shiloh Church is and flows down right there, all at the same place. Also, Ray Spring pours in right there. And at the time, these creeks have all now been channelized, but at the time they were not. So at the time, this was entirely filled with swamp. Entirely filled with swamp and mud and briars. It was not cultivatable. And so this was, General Patrick Claiborne called it an impassable morass. An almost impassable morass. Use the word morass for it. And what it did is, when Claiborne came down off this hill, Claiborne's brigade came down off this hill, skirmishers in front, pushing the Union skirmishers back. And indeed, Company A, Captain Stevens, and a couple companies of the 57th Ohio fell back fighting all the way through the morass and all the way over, and with the Confederate skirmishers of the 15th Arkansas pushing them. It wasn't until they got within this last few hundred yards, or last quarter of a mile, that the 15th Arkansas fell back behind the line of battle, reformed, and went over to the left, so that now Claiborne had a line of battle and nothing between his line of battle and the Yankees. And then they advanced down here, but they were advancing in a northeasterly direction, and they were encountering Sherman's line of battle facing directly south. So their left flank was marching right into a flank fire from Sherman's position over here, and they had to adjust. Every regiment had to readjust, took time, had to readjust and attack here. Two of Claiborne's regiments, the two on the right, his right flank regiment was the 23rd Tennessee, and his next one was the 6th Mississippi Regiment. They did not change. They did not change when they got to the morass. They shot straight on across this creek here, went straight up the hill and attacked in a northeasterly direction into the camp of the 53rd Ohio Regiment. And they did that alone without any support whatsoever on their left. The rest of the brigade adjusted from facing northeast to facing north and attacked straight up the Corinth Road. And so the main part of Claiborne's brigade attacked straight up the road, right at about, they probably would have made the attack finally about 6:30, 7:30 or 7:45, after the first cannon shot having been fired at 7:10. So Claiborne had this problem. He had his brigade was separated. Two regiments over there, the rest of the regiments over here. Claiborne had to try to ride through, he attempted to ride through the impassable morass to get from one side, one part of his brigade to the other. And in doing that, his horse mired in the mud. His horse got mired in the mud, and it struggled to get out, and it threw him. So Claiborne went plop right in the mud. There's been a little bit of speculation about exactly where Claiborne fell in the mud. I'm not sure that's one of the more important questions about the Battle of Shiloh, but I have actually seen some arguments about it where the veterans were saying it was here, and we found Claiborne's dead horse stuck in the mud after the battle. But they put him anywhere from up there by Ray Springs to down here at the confluence of the. So all I know, it was in here. All we know now, it was in here. He was trying to ride from one side of his brigade to the other. He got stuck in there and he got thrown. He said he got out with a great deal of difficulty. So for all of this time, think about trying to ride between them. The horse gets stuck, he gets thrown, he gets out of the mud with difficulty, and then finally he joins the other side of his brigade. All during that time, however long that takes, there's no commander for this brigade. And so the local commanders, the regimental commanders, just throw their regiments right across the creek and attempt to attack up the hill on the other side. And by this time, the Federal skirmishers have fallen back, and Sherman has a strong line of battle, initially right at the creek. And the first attacks come straight down the road, and there's very bloody fighting right in the morass and right to the west of the morass. And the Confederates were driven back originally. Claiborne was driven back. Claiborne's regiments reorganized, attacked again, and then drove the Federals to the top of the hill, and then that is where the line stabilized for the next 2 hours. For the next, 8 to about 10. About 8 to about 10. And the Confederates continued to attack through, the following brigades continued to attack up the hill. And if you look over here by the road, you'll see tablets for Claiborne's brigade, tablet for Anderson's brigade, tablet for Johnson's brigade, all covering the same ground and attacking. But we're going to come up to the top of the hill and follow the two stray regiments that didn't make the adjustment and attacked into the 53rd Ohio camp.